There he is.
All right. We're on.
Okay, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the August 10th, 2020 special meeting of the Select Board, primarily to talk about goals and objectives and strategy, conversation among the board members, talk about short-term and long-term objectives. We also have two matters of business that we have to address before we move into the general discussion. And the first of these really is a request from the town clerk's office for the board to consider adopting the warrant for the election, the primary election on September 1st. So each member of the board should have received a copy of the warrant for the state primary. Basically, it is a notice from the board to the public that an election will be held, and it's our responsibility to vote to post that warrant and to execute it as well. So are there any questions from the members of the board with respect to this document?
No, thank you.
I guess that just for purposes of discussion, the election is a primary election. The offices that are under contention are senator, representative in Congress for the 4th Congressional District, council for the 2nd District, that's the Governor's Council, senator in the General Court for Norfolk, Bristol, and Middlesex District. There are two representatives, one of which represents one of our precincts and the other represents the other two. That's the 5th and the 9th, the 5th Middlesex and the 9th Norfolk. We also will be voting on register of probate, county commissioner, county treasurer, sheriff to fill a vacancy. So that election again will be held on September 20th at the Veterans Memorial Building. I'll just ask the town administrator if he could briefly just alert the folks as to what the plan is in terms of holding the election in the town hall. We've had some conversation about some water damage in the gym, but I want to make sure that everybody understands where we're going to hold this election.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we did have some water damage in the gymnasium in the Veterans Memorial Building. Luckily, it's covered by our insurance. However, we do need to have the floor replaced in the gymnasium here. We have spoken with our insurer as well as the company that is going to be replacing the floor. They're going to be pulling up the floor later this week and prepping the concrete slab underneath, and the gymnasium will be available for the election, the primary election on September 1st. The new floor will go in sometime after the primary. So the election will be held in the gymnasium of the Veterans Memorial Building. So we are working with the town clerk's office as well as the other election officials to make sure we have a smooth election. And like I said, everything should be fine for the at the polling place on Election Day on September 1st.
Okay, thank you. Polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. There's no reduced hours. It's the state election. However, people, as you know, are free to request an absentee ballot for any reason. So that if they choose to vote by mail, that option is available to them. What I heard is there are apparently several thousand Millis residents who have already requested mail-in ballots. So if that's still available to you. Okay, next time on the agenda is an opportunity for us to have a conversation with Chiefs of Fire. As everyone is aware, there is activity at the state level regarding proposed legislation relative to police reform. I talked to the chief, thought it'd be a good idea for the chief and the board to talk a little bit about how this impacts the town of Millis and what our chief and our police force would request us to do in order to show the kind of support that we have shown for the police department over the last decade and more, particularly as it goes to, constructing the new police headquarters, supporting the expansion of the police force, hiring chiefs of fire to be our chief, and then supporting him because of his excellent work with our citizens as well as with the board, and then recognizing the contributions by the police department in a broad spectrum of areas, from community policing to leadership programs, etc. So anyway, I'd like the chief to just talk to us a little bit about his issues, concerns, ideas with respect to this particular legislative action, and what he might like to see the board to consider in terms of our response.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for having me. Can you guys hear me? I got a new headset, so I'm not sure if you can hear me that well.
We can hear you clear and clear as day.
Excellent. Thank you for allowing me to come in tonight and inform the board as to where we stand right now. Right now, there's a couple versions of the bill between the House and the Senate for police reform. Both bills have fundamental change to civil service, collective bargaining, labor management, and the big one is qualified immunity for our police officers. It's in negotiations right now between the Senate and the House. Like you said, Mr. McCaffrey, we have an excellent relationship with the residents and the town of Millis. Our officers do an outstanding job for the community. However, this bill, if passed, would have a significant impact on the way we operate here. In addition to the bill, I'm just going to throw this in too. We've been dealing with the pandemic in the middle of this whole thing, and civil unrest, as well as the negative side effects of the economy within our community. The calls have gone up as a result of all of this, and our officers show up every day and do a great job. My concern is that the state reps, the Senate, as well as the governor need to hear from communities. I'm not against changing the bill or police reform to a degree, but doing it so quickly without putting thought into it, that's a problem, because this is going to significantly impact all police departments, just not Millis. But if passed, what I foresee happening is anybody with tenure will leave policing. The quality of candidates will definitely be reduced. To be quite frank, I don't think people will want to be police officers, to be honest with you. So what I'm asking the town to consider is drafting a letter to our state reps, the senator, and the governor, voicing support for your police department and urging them to slow down and look at the big picture rather than just acting on emotion, because there are people involved in this bill that have no idea about how policing works, making serious decisions that would impact all of us.
Well, thank you, Chief. I guess that, I think that one of the reasons we wanted to meet tonight rather than wait till next week is, time is clicking here. And it's important for us as a community to discuss it, understand it, try to take a position on it, because it is a moving target. I know that the legislators believe that, this is reasonably far down the trail, but we may have a different view. And I think that we may be seeing other communities around the Commonwealth beginning to step up and suggest that perhaps this thing ought to take a little different track. But so I'd like to, I think it's important for us to understand a little bit when you're talking about the personnel who serve our town in the police department. I mean, I think, frankly, the issue with police is with any organization, is understanding the roles and responsibilities and the leadership that the department and the department officers show to make sure that those rules and regulations are followed. And from, my personal point of view, we have a very strong force that's shown time and time again how it's part of the community. We have strong leadership in our department to make sure that we're trying to treat all of our citizens in a reasonably equal manner. If you do a good thing, then we're fine with it. If you don't do a good thing, then we're not fine with it. So I think it's important for us to weigh in at this point, because if we don't, we're going to regret it. Talk a little bit more about what you see as a threat to the personnel, your team.
So the threat, the big threat with the qualified immunity, just to make it simple so everybody can kind of understand. I'll give you the example of, you go to a disturbance and there's somebody that may be out of control, and you need to address the issue, whether it be, a use of force, meaning you may have to deploy your taser. Well, if we get rid of qualified immunity, there's a strong possibility that an officer may hesitate and react accordingly because he or she is afraid of getting sued. Because ultimately that's what they're trying to get rid of. So anybody can go after an officer individually, which is crazy to me. That is the big one. That, and I talked about retention and recruitment. That is going to be a difficult process if this passes. And again, I foresee probably a significant number of officers, not just in Millis, but in all areas around, leaving policing in early retirement. And what I'm afraid of is you're going to have all this experience go out the door at the same time, and you're left with a young, green department, not just in Millis, everywhere. This would force people out. And I believe today, or yesterday, I'm sorry, maybe Friday, it was either Friday or today, Connecticut just passed the qualified immunity, which it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But this is serious, and like I said, you guys in the town have been awesome to the police department, supporting us. I think your voices need to be heard. The Mass Chiefs of Police have unanimously stuck together and are against this. And I know that you may or may not have seen us, but we were over in Framingham a few weeks ago in regards to this bill. In addition, the local police union as well as MassCop is 100% against this as well. But what we're looking for is your support, your continued support, but at the state level as well would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, Mr. Germain or Ms. Underhill, would you like to weigh in on this and have a conversation about it at this point?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Erin, please.
I do agree that the bill may be concerning, especially as I understand that the unions weren't involved. They didn't have a seat at the table during this. That would have probably made a whole lot more sense so that, actual conversations could take place. I'm also a fan of our Millis Police Department. I think everybody is exceptional that I've encountered. I'm happy to lend them my personal support and, have the discussion at the board level on what we can do to help.
I will.
Mr. Germain?
Thank you. I'll go along with what Erin said, but I'd like to add a few comments, if I may. It's important from my perspective when I look at what we have for what I think is an outstanding police force, to recognize that they have earned our support as opposed to we are required to give our support to them. And I think that is representative of what you have brought to the department and what I've seen from the members since I've been working with them. I would go along with the concept of looking at, slowing it down, looking at what is happening in other states, such as Connecticut, that are passing laws, and seeing what the implications are. There's no need, from my perspective, to rush to judgment on something like this. I understand where it's coming from. But I think we need to step back a little, and I have no problem personally supporting the concept of asking the state legislators to step back just a bit, take a deep breath. And I think Erin's point is excellent, that the unions need to be at the table. That doesn't mean we always agree. That's not the point. But they do represent, I believe, the needs of the police force, and the state ought to take that into consideration when they're legislating on something like this. At any rate, I will say I am very pleased with what I have seen from top to bottom in your department, and you should be proud of it. And I can tell you, the citizens of the town, from everyone I've spoken with, are likewise proud to have you as serving our needs.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess that in terms of just a next step for us, there's nothing certainly to prevent each one of us or any of us from contacting state legislators. I had a conversation with one of them the other day, and heard a little bit more about the rationale for moving forward. I do think there is a little bit of a disconnect, and I do think that it's important for, as I said to one of the legislators, similar to what Mr. Germain has just stated. I mean, our police force here has earned the respect and gratitude of the people of this town. And earned is the most important word. And as I said, also, that's a reflection on the force and the leadership of the force. And if they want to talk about, some of the things that could improve, perhaps in police departments, if more police departments, I suspect, had the kind of leadership and the dedication that our folks have demonstrated, perhaps we wouldn't have some of the issues that have arisen. Now, I don't suggest, and I think we all would agree, there are real issues here. And I think that that is true. But I can certainly support a unified letter from us, communication from us, indicating that we think there are concerns with the current bill as it is proposed, that more time needs to be spent to consider the implications, not simply to some law enforcement teams, but to all of them. And that would include the kinds of things that we've learned as a town in working with our chief and our department to deliver, an effective police force that we can be proud of. So I would suggest that we make a motion that we, as a board, reach out to the legislators, tell them that we believe that there's problems with the bill as drafted, and if we want to go so far as to include the qualified immunity as the issue that is of importance to us. I suspect there are a number of things that are important in the bill, not just one. And that we would urge them to spend more time to deliberate over this thing and see what it really means to police forces across the Commonwealth, and not simply for a few high-profile forces.
We would greatly appreciate that.
Then I would make a motion that we, as a board, draft a communique to our legislators stating many of the points that you just made as chair, and that we, the three of us, sign it and send it forward.
Second.
So a motion.
Okay.
there a second?
Yes, second.
I get a second. Okay, so it's moved and seconded that the board prepare this communication to be forwarded to our legislators and the governor. All those in favor, please say aye. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I got to pull. Mr. McCaffrey, yes. Mr. Jermaine?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Okay, so now somebody has to volunteer to write it. So that we can move this along, Mr. Jermaine.
Yeah. I knew it was coming. Okay, I will draft something. I am assuming it's okay for me to discuss this with the town administrator.
Absolutely, yes.
Then I will
Yes.
put forward a draft and get it out so that we can all review it in the very near future.
Very good. So we can circulate it, and then this is the kind of thing that, we can all sign it and send it, and then figure out what the follow-up might be in terms of either direct conversation with legislators or some other activity, because I do think they need to understand it's important. And I want the police force and the people in the town of Millis to understand that this is something that we feel very strongly about, and we are looking to support our police department so it can continue to earn our gratitude and admiration for the good work that they do.
I would concur. May I ask one question? When I circulate this, should I do it through the town administrator, or is this a...
Yeah, why don't you just do it through him? That'd be fine.
I think it avoids any open meeting law issues.
Right.
Speaking.
I think as long as we work through the town administrator and we've already taken a public stance, I
Right.
think we'll be able to put it together. Okay, good. Thank you, Chief, for joining us. You're free to listen in for the rest of it if you'd like, or do more productive things with your time.
Thank you. I just want to thank the board, and thank you very much for allowing me to come in and continue to support our department. It goes a long way, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to hear the outcome of tonight's meeting. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Have a good night.
Have a good night. Yep. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is a discussion among the board dealing with a number of items that I think are important for us to have a conversation about. This is not for us to take action, but it is for us to sort of discuss what we believe is the big picture. What I want to do is, as I've told the board members, sort of the structure of this will be to have a conversation about strategic objectives, hear from each of the members of the board as to what their thoughts are on what objectives should be from a strategy point of view, both short-term and long-term. I'd like to take a step to then to see if we can start to translate those objectives into some specific stretch goals for 2021, this fiscal year, knowing full well that a lot of what we're set on, the course we're set on is dependent on the budgeting, but I think this is still important, an opportunity for us to try and focus on where we think the most important emphasis should be, because we can't do everything. I mean, that's certainly something that we've all learned. And if we can translate the goal setting, then we can move that to a way of setting goals for our employees, in particular the town administrator. We adopted a process last year where the town administrator has agreed to a contract which allows him some variable compensation if he is successful in achieving goals that we set. So it's important for us to set those goals early on to make them achievable for him and for us. So that's the goal setting and sort of the strategy conversation, goal setting. I'd like us also to talk about something that is, is highlighted even more today than it has been in other years, which is really the financial forecasts. We have a budget. One of the premises of the budget that we set has already been changed because of the state aid decision, so that we're actually going to have more funds available than we had anticipated. That one component of our revenue. But I think it's important for us not only to talk about the revenue picture, but also talk about some, what I think we're going to need, which is some more real-time financial monitoring. Not only where we are going, but where we stand, what collections look like, what issues we're finding in terms of, perhaps deep decline in meals tax, decline in whatever. So I think it's important for us to try to keep our hands in that as well. I'd like to talk a little bit about select board operations. By that I mean, we have talked about for a while, since I've been on the board, which is proof that my being on the board does not necessarily translate into action, to develop a more specific standard process and procedure for the select board itself. How we conduct our business, how we set agendas, how we treat the subjects that we deal with. I think we do a reasonably good job, but I think it's much better for us to try and develop a set of procedures and processes so that everybody will be on the same page and we will all understand how we're supposed to behave and act as members of the board. One of the things that I want to talk about in that context too is the role of the tri-board, which we have been involved with in the past. It got a little bit perhaps off track toward the end of last year. They've already reached out to the school committee chair and the finance committee chair, and they're willing to re-examine that and get going with it again, but I'd like to talk a little bit about how we interact with them. I do think in terms of the underlying operation of the board, we need to spend a little bit more time again on meeting preparation. How do we prepare ourselves for a meeting? And I use the example because I was floundering at the last meeting. When we get 200 pages of land use documentation, much of which is not understandable to the normal human being, and we get it on Thursday night for a meeting, even if we get it Thursday night, it's way too much to try and digest and understand over a weekend. What can we do to accelerate the distribution of that information to members of the board, give board members an opportunity to ask questions of either the proponents or the town engineer or something, so that we can do a better job. Back in the olden days of the 1990s, we had what we called a table box. The table box was literally a box on the table with all the documents in it. And it was available to members of the board. And as things came in, whether it be plans or, proposals for major contracts, the documentation was made available and members of the board came in and could read it before the meeting and well before, the night before. Now, we didn't always do it, but at least it was available. So I want to talk a little bit about what we might do to see if we can get that information more readily available, which simply improves our ability to make informed decisions. And then last but not least, we wanted to talk about some of the committees, some of the structure of those committees, determination as to whether some of them have, as we've sort of indicated, outlived their usefulness. Committee that hasn't met since 2014 is probably not really going to meet again, as well as some committees which may need to be re-engineered to be more effective and be more focused. So that's what we're trying to do tonight. Again, it's some strategic goal discussion, some trying to articulate the goals for the board so that we can translate them into goals for the town administrator and other department heads, talk a little bit about financial monitoring beyond what we already do, and then talk a little bit about our own operations and how we can improve both our experience and the quality of the decision making, leading last but not least to the committee. So that's what I'd like to try to do this evening. I wanted to give some structure to it. We intentionally went into this without PowerPoints and presentations and whatnot, because it's going to be a little bit more free-flowing and hopefully a creative conversation. So with that said, I think the first thing to talk about really is, that I'd like to talk about is, some of the strategic objectives. What should we be, as a town, thinking about and articulating in terms of some of the strategies that we have to deal with? And so taking that, I'm going to go to each member of the board and ask you to describe what your thoughts are. I'll be the chair and I'll go first. But I'm sure there are other thoughts, and let's sort of do this in each of us go, and then if we want to have conversation about it, to try and come to some feeling that, one of us has a goal that's probably not going to be shared by the board, so let's put it to the side, because this is really the strategy as envisioned by the board, not by individual members of the board. So anyway, having said that, what do I think we need to talk about as a board and focus on in the coming year? And I've sort of headlined them in a couple of buckets. One bucket is what I call efficient and accountable operation. What are we going to do? What have we been doing, and what should we continue to do to make sure that our operation is as efficient and cost-effective as it can be? Because it's the taxpayers' money, and we want to be sure that we're spending that money in a way that is the most effective and efficient to deliver the services that they expect. Some of the things under here, may well be shared services model. What services should we strive to combine across the town, across municipal and school, for example? I've talked already about select board policies. How do we make ourselves more efficient and effective? I think it's important for us, and then we've noted it a number of times and haven't done a lot on it, is to spend a little bit more time on broader-based financial policies. If you look at the town budget, we talk about specific policies which we have with respect to investment of, for example, OPEB money, but we haven't really articulated clearly enough some of the other critical financial policies around whether it's cash recognition or revenue sharing with the school committee or whatever. And the town financial advisor has told us repeatedly that to have these kinds of things articulated and then actually executed ultimately give you the opportunity to improve your bond rating, which then gives you the opportunity to reduce borrowing costs. And under the header of, efficient operations, I think we need to talk a little bit about performance management, not just from the town administrator, but how we apply performance management principles across the enterprise, particularly as they apply to department heads. Another area that I think we need to spend some time on, from my perspective, is services delivered to seniors. As a population in our town, a growing population, what kind of services should the town of Millis, in all the departments, seek to provide to our seniors? It's beyond simply the Council on Aging. It's broader than that. But it does lead directly into conversation around what kind of senior center we might try to either redevelop or develop, because it becomes an integral element of the delivery of services to seniors. This question is one that the architects working with the Permanent Building Committee are asking repeatedly, because in order to design a building or a facility, you have to know what programs you're going to provide. So anyway, I think that's important. So the next one I think is enterprise governance. This would be water, sewer, and stormwater. We certainly have a burning issue on capacity management in one of the enterprises, that is the sewer enterprise. But all of them have capacity issues. All of them have a role in economic development. All of them are impacted by cost allocation between general fund and the enterprise funds, and all of them are affected by an asset management process. So we've talked a little bit about this, and I think it's important for us to consider how we want to move forward in exercising our governance and oversight of the enterprises. I think we do need to have some continuing conversation about communication and engagement strategies. There's technologies that we use, but they are simply tools. And certainly I've had strong views on this for quite a while, and I've had the pleasure of having the majority of the board not agree with me. So as to how we deliver these services, but that's fine. The ultimate issue here is how do we engage our citizens? How do we communicate effectively with them? And how do we manage that process? Because as we all know, having the best website on earth is no good if we don't have an active methodology for managing the content. so that we deliver to the customers what they expect on the website. So it's not only the plan, it's the resource identification and having a realistic way of actually doing a good job with the technology. The next item really is sort of a given. I'm not sure it rises to, well, it's important, which is our oversight responsibility for major projects. We have an oversight responsibility as the board for the finalization of the Clyde Brown School because we issued the contract. We were the ones who issued the contract and signed it. That we also have responsibility then for the execution of the DPW building, the Lansing Millis building, and any senior center that we identify to move forward from a construction perspective. Then we also have an issue around housing. This is an issue that has arisen at the state level, for example, in some rather onerous proposals relative to zoning or eliminating zoning for multifamily housing. We have a housing plan that we put together, a housing production plan, complemented by an open space plan. Very good, strong documents that have been developed with tremendous amount of community input, particularly on the open space side. They're sitting there ready to be implemented. What are we doing to implement them? That's part of our issue. And my favorite of all time, because of my frustration over 25 years, is roads maintenance and repair. And that's an issue that keeps coming up because it's really very difficult to navigate the roads in town. So those are some of the things that I thought we should be thinking about. I'm sure there's some overlap with other members of the board, but I'd like to then give each member of the board the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the things you think we should be thinking about, and then maybe have some dialogue around how we try to prioritize some of these things. So seniority is always important. So I'll go to Mr. Jermaine next, because someday Aaron will be the chair. Tom will be well served by that, I must say.
Okay, that's quite a list. I'm going to go down your list as best I can and highlight points from my perspective, maybe adding some and so forth. When we got, the first one I think you mentioned had to deal with efficient and accountable operations. And within that, you had shared services. That gets at a point that I'm going to perhaps drill down one more level that I'm quite concerned with. And within shared services, I think we could do better as a town, and many towns have done this, of combining certain services within the town itself. It's not necessarily easy to do. I obviously will pick the first one, saying the information services or information technology. I'm not a big proponent of technology per se. What I'm concerned with is the utilization of that technology. And that kind of overlaps with something that came up a little later, ensuring the security of it and looking at it from the perspective of the whole town. We are utterly dependent upon the information services that we utilize within this town. We can't operate without them. It's that simple. And over the last couple of years, I can tell you, we have spent a considerable sum of money to establish certainly a more protected and viable system for the future. But we need to understand the pros and cons of that. What actions should we be taking to ensure the security and the integrity of that system? And what should the users of the system understand so that they too can help protect it? And that's my concern, is even though we're talking at a high level with respect to the board, I think it's important that the user community, in this case, many of them are employees of the town, throughout the town, understand they have a role to play in this also. They're not just participants, but they govern how things work. And we need to be listening to what they say and making sure they understand where we're headed and we understand what their concerns are. So that's all a part of it. Which leads me to what you brought out as the policy of the select board. And I looked at it a little differently. We may have a select board policy, but our policy cannot stand alone from the employees and the users of the services that the town provides and the technologies that are implemented and the way in which we utilize the equipment and all the other service functions in the town. It's a two-way street. I'm concerned that we not look at it as the select board is up here setting a policy and thou shalt use that policy in these ways in the departments. And in fact, it's a partnership. And my feeling, and this is my personal feeling, is we need to implement policies that represent and enhance that partnership throughout the town. Easier said than done, perhaps, but that's my view. The financial policies, I think we should do a better job of defining. We have, for example, defined what the policy is with respect to stabilization fund, how much we can draw it down before we have to add more. OPEB, how soon we will add things to it. But they are also somewhat amorphous in the way they are described. They certainly are not understood by a lot of people outside of the groups or committees that deal with these issues on a regular basis. We need to do a better job of explaining not just what they are, but what they mean to the town and how they are viewed by, as you mentioned, credit organizations and others, and why we are therefore putting these types of policies together with respect to them. I don't want to belabor it. Go ahead. I think you want to say something.
No.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No.
Oh, no.
Go ahead.
And then you discussed the concept of performance management by department heads. And I think that's the part that's important to me also. It's not just performance management. It's working with the department heads so that there's a two-way street. And I don't in any way mean to suggest that it circumvents the town administrator. And so please don't interpret it that way. But there's no reason we can't give ideas and make suggestions and provide recommendations as to how this should be done, or if we see something, work with the town administrator and therefore get it down to department head level, because that's where the work actually gets done. Not that our town administrator doesn't do any work, but the point being that's where the individual workers are doing their specific jobs. I don't have much to add to the senior services. We all understand they make up a large portion of the residents or citizens of this town, and we need to be cognizant of that and be taking actions accordingly to assist them in a number of ways. It's just, I could probably go through others, but I think what you mentioned is just fine. Enterprise governance, obviously I've become more involved in that this year. It's becoming a much more critical issue to us, not just with stormwater or sewage capacity or water availability. We're going to have issues associated with chemicals in the water, pollutants, and whatever. It is becoming a much more pervasive issue that our town has to address, and there are going to be potentially substantial costs associated with it. And to that end, we need to have a strong representation and good dialogue with the various other community groups, whether it be Charles River or the towns or even our legislators, as to concerns we have and the implications of laws and policies that are being passed and what it means to our towns. Excuse me, I'm quite concerned that in an effort to make sure we have absolutely the best of everything, many times we don't think about the cost benefit analysis portion of that. There are trade-offs. We can't be perfect in every way, and there are limited resources in this town to address some of these things. If we get hit with a requirement to implement $1 million worth of cleansing of our water, for example, that's going to be a major problem for us. Where's that money going to come from? And that's just one issue. There are many others that we could bring up. Asset management, I'm not going to get into. There are other aspects of that. But it leads to this technologies used. And so I'm going to bring up the point that you can't isolate the technology in many cases and the systems associated with those technologies from the operations themselves. And so if we're going to look at the implementation of a technology or have a study, whether it be for security or cryptography or any number of things that we might be concerned with as a town, we ought to be looking at that not just on a departmental level, but from the perspective of the town as a whole. To take these as isolated instances will lead us down a primrose path that I can guarantee you from my experience, and that's about 50 years of experience now, will probably end up costing us more in the long run and not even addressing the salient issues that should have been addressed to begin with. So I understand the need, for example, of cybersecurity in the police station. I don't know the details, but I understand there's a need for it, as well as whether it be in water, the schools, treasury. There are many issues, but that's one issue as a whole that we ought to be looking at with respect to the whole town, because it has a pervasive effect on how we operate. And that's just one example. Oversight, I think, is a combination of our availability and an absolute necessity to be attending the meetings that are associated with the agreements that we've made to form the committees that are actually doing the work on a regular basis. I could use the PBC and ESBC as examples, but we need to understand, even if we agree that there's a committee in place, we have an obligation, whichever one of us is selected to represent us at those committees, to be at those meetings and to report back. And quite honestly, that to me has been a big issue, because we seldom get the report back of what's been happening in these meetings. Where are we? Are there basic issues that are being confronted? What do we think as a board ought to be done? Is there anything we can do? And I don't think that portion of the dialogue has been very well executed in the past. I don't mean to point fingers at anyone. That's not the point. My point is we need, as a team, and we are a team, to work together better in keeping each other informed at our select board meetings of what's going on within these committees. My view again, but that's something I felt very strongly about for a long time. And I'm not even going to get into roads at this point. And all I have to do is tell you that my front end needs to be aligned one more time. I thought I'd lost a tire again. So,
Well, Pete, you should drive down Orchard Street now. Go out of your way and drive down Orchard Street. It's a pleasure.
I have driven down it. It's quite different than it was.
Quite different. And I was very happy to see on the side street, which is exactly what I thought was going to happen, police were there ready to catch the speeders, because as soon as that road is fixed and the lines in the middle, accelerating the speed is going to happen.
But I can also tell you there are a number of other streets, as you well know, such as Ridge and so forth, where if you're not careful, you get the opportunity to replace a tire, a wheel, or a front end if you hit some of those holes. And
My drive from home to the town hall now doesn't have to deal with Orchard Street, but it certainly has to deal with Ridge.
And please understand that no way am I disparaging DPW. That is not the case.
Right.
I think everybody understands there's no way that we can keep up with this at this time.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think I was too long-winded, but I apologize.
So, Erin, what are your thoughts at this point?
Well, first I will say I'm very glad that you went first. So thank you.
That's just going to tear me apart.
No. So I looked at the last goals that had been outlined, and listening to what you guys have both said so far about these current goals, I agree with all of them. I'm very interested in hearing more about some of them, and I definitely feel like I can add some more thoughts to some of them. I guess if I'll just pick off a few, this shared services model, I think financially, operation-wise, a lot of that makes sense. If we have the resources in one place in town, I agree that it would be good to see what we can do to get that to expand more across the board. I'm thinking more, for a good example, more like Pete said, the IT area. I'll jump around a little bit. Actually, the IT for like tech security, and actually to sort of jump to communication engagement, it's the cybersecurity part's going to be really important. I mean, it already is, but technology plays such a big role. How we function, we need these systems online, we need to be able to communicate. Anything being compromised is going to be a huge issue and a huge expense. I work with hospital software where people keep getting ransomware, for example. These are very, very big concerns. In the area, though, of technology and communication and engagement, I think there does need to be more of a discussion. I don't know which direction it should go. I don't know what the right answer is, but I look around and I see how people are reacting. The easiest thing for me is on social media. We would like to. I'm sure we'd like people to listen to these meetings, but they're not going to. So I think what's really important sometimes is the way we're able to push information out. So pushing information out via the Facebook page. Obviously not everyone's on Facebook, but there's a decent chunk of people that are on there and pay attention to it. So pushing information out through that page, a great job's been done so far, but giving people a little bit more. So I've run into, for instance, with the water ban, lack of detail makes people talk, makes people question, makes conversations go all sorts of other directions. So more detail that we can provide on things and volunteer up would probably be helpful when communicating in that method. And that, I think that engagement, I think showing that we're trying to use different venues and avenues to get information to people and to involve and engage, I think that goes a long way. For select board policies, effectiveness, efficiency, I think that's really also really important. I mean, right now, I'm obviously the newbie here in many ways, and looking at the vast knowledge that you two gentlemen have, having some solidified policies would be really helpful to the future of the board, because you have this experience and, you know, frankly, I believe you're good at what you're doing. So having this down into more of a policy that can be followed for direction would be very helpful and important for the future of the board. For the seniors, I've actually had somebody reach out to me specifically about rides to appointments. So, and I do agree in general that senior services for seniors is definitely lacking. The easiest way to put it, I guess. So that's something I would really like to see. If money was no object and I had a wish list, we'd have a fabulous senior center and, you know, rides to any appointments and awesome services. I've been to the senior center, the new one, and it's in Medway, and it's a beautiful building. I actually took a continuing ed type of a wreath making class there. So it's a senior center, but it's also a community space, which I think, you know, obviously makes the building even more useful. I too am concerned with the enterprise items, especially in terms of water quality and, you know, the cost. Obviously, I'm expecting that the board has to do some more discussions about where we're going with that in terms of those like evaluations and what companies we will hire to do that work. But that's obviously a very important item. The oversight on the projects, that's something else I'd want to talk a little bit more about. I agree with Mr. Germain that it's really important to get reports back. So the point of us serving on these different committees and spending time going to all these other committee meetings is so that we can stay in the loop and we can understand where all these other places are going. We're lucky that we have so many great volunteers here that put all this work into all these committees, and although it's a lot for the three of us, we need to make sure that we have our, you know, I guess finger on the pulse of that, so to speak. So maybe as even part of select board policies, we put something in about maybe we'd want to put something in like the method of reporting back from these committees or level of involvement if that's not already defined. And then for, you know, obviously the roads, I don't know that I have to say anything else about that. You know, the fact that we have a great capital projects group is going to be very important because it looks like in town a lot of things just came up at the same time, which has been obviously really difficult for people expense-wise with so many new buildings at once. But in doing the right preventative maintenance on all these wonderful new buildings we have to make sure that we're ahead of the game if anything's needed would be very important. And I'm sure as people see down the road, probably not, God, I hope not, within the 3 years of this board, I would assume there's at least another building or two that would probably need concerns addressed in town as well. So, but I think that's probably a more distant future. I don't think I had anything specific to add outside of the list that's been established, but just to kind of comment on those pieces.
Okay, thanks. I think that one of the things that I wanted to mention but didn't, which is not really a strategic goal, but it is an overarching responsibility, is of course to continue to monitor with our town administrator and Board of Health and the school committee and the emergency planning, the COVID impact, both with respect to the delivery of town services and the impact, the public health impact on our citizens. I think that we've had some recurring report backs shared with the board. We probably will continue to do that. But just as an example, in conversation earlier today about thinking ahead to a meeting in November. We had thought back in May, if we can just get through spring, we'd be back to normal by November. Probably not so much. So, frankly, the way we hold an election next month is going to be dramatically different. And so anyway, I think we need to continue to monitor it. It's not a strategic goal, but it's certainly an overarching responsibility as leaders of the town to make sure that we're on top of that as well. Well, let me just I would like to talk a little bit about the shared services idea and some of the thoughts you've had, particular, giving it a little bit more substance. I guess I didn't intend that we would simply declare shared services and everybody would report the same purpose. I think Mr. Green's comments about if we have a shared approach to cybersecurity without organizational consolidation, that's probably a good idea. That leads you though to what group then formulates that policy and is able to enforce it. And I think the technology is probably the most complex of the thoughts that I was thinking, the one I understand the least. But the concept that we are delivering services digitally to our employees, to our citizens, to the students in our schools, just tells you, doesn't it, that you need to figure out a way to have the operating principles be consistent across the enterprise. And I know that's way too simplistic, but we have consolidated from an organizational point of view the finance function, and what we did to help us execute that was the tedious work of creating a chart of accounts across the Munis system to help us to manage our financial picture a little bit more efficiently and effectively across the enterprise. How is that working for us? What has it done for us? What does it enable us and the school committee as decision makers to have access to? That's the point of it, not simply to consolidate it. So you can say on paper that now we have one finance director. But we have also buildings. We've talked about this before. We have a number of buildings which have different uses for different constituencies. On the other hand, they all have roofs. They all have, well, not all of them, many of them have air conditioning systems, some of which work, some of which don't. They have windows, you know what I'm trying to say. They have a maintenance schedule. Are we at a point where we would benefit as a town by having a consolidated building department that takes care of the buildings in a consistent way, that doesn't depend upon the budgetary vagaries of a particular department, but in fact invest the town's money across the substantial infrastructure that we have, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And then we have the things that keep popping up, like fields management. How do we have somebody that manages the fields in a consistent way? Not that we're going to be able to take care of every single field in exactly the same way, but can develop both a maintenance program, which may require some rotation, as well as a scheduling program. So this is a big topic requiring dialogue with primarily the school department. And, my experience certainly with the finance director consolidation is, honestly, they were the ones that mentioned it first when we were both in the process of understanding that we were going to be replacing the business manager and the finance director, saying, okay, there's an opportunity here. Should we look at it? And we did. So from my point of view, if it's a goal to develop a process for shared services, it's a goal that includes a dialogue with the other stakeholders, if you will, and leadership from the board, as well as the school committee, if they believe this is a good way to go. And then some development of implementation steps and prioritization. Now, we're not going to wave the magic wand and put all this together over the next budget, but I think it's important for us to try to tackle this because it's a really substantive way of looking at a shared concept of what the enterprise is delivering to its customers, if you will. The one function I forgot to mention, which may actually be easier, I think it could be, is personnel. Why is it that we don't have a personnel manager, or if we did have one, or an HR director, or whatever you want to call it, wouldn't it be effective if that person was responsible for the full gamut of employees paid by the town and the school? That might be justifiable at that point. Now it's complicated and there's multiple collective bargaining agreements, et cetera, but it does have some appeal to it in terms of our ability to operate as a more effectively for purposes of serving the ultimate customer, which is, the taxpayer of the town mills. So that's a lot in one topic, but if you don't start somewhere, you don't make much progress. And I believe we made a start, and it's worked out reasonably well. And how do we leverage that? It also, the way we address these things, the budget tells us what we are doing to do this right. The budget tells us that we have done, from a financial perspective, a less than satisfactory job with IT director. The notion that this town relies still on a volunteer to try and corral the IT function is a tremendous tribute to the volunteer. And at this stage of the game, an indictment of the enterprise for not investing money in that function. Now, I was one of the ones that said we don't have the money to fund it this year. But that can't be the long-term response here. We have to develop a plan for not only a shared service model for IT delivery and standards across, but a management team that can actually run it. Because we're all sitting here saying how important it is. And where's our commitment both from the planning point of view and the budget point of view? Anyway, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts, Pete, on that, or...
Well, certainly I have some thoughts on it, but that's a different issue, a somewhat different issue. What I was thinking about is you point these out, and I have thought about it for a while. We have within the tri-board, if you will, the concept of three key groups that don't necessarily have to be totally focused financially, but represent significant areas of the town in terms of how we might go about combining some services and coordinating some of the budgetary issues across multi-departments. I can use IT as an example. I could just as easily use fields or anything else that you were just talking about. I would suggest that maybe we change the dynamic of the tri-board a little bit in that context and maybe use it with a select subgroup of the tri-board. And maybe that's the way to think about how we bring some of these organizations together. I strongly believe in what we discussed couple of weeks ago in terms of Erin becoming our representative to the schools, assuming they're willing in that regard, and I would hope they would be. But I think it goes beyond that. We have an obligation to the town to make the best use of the resources we have. And I'm not saying we aren't making good use of them, but I think there are better ways to further make better use of what's there. And to that end, I think we need to talk about it. And I don't see how we can do it without getting, obviously, the two key bodies, the schools and ourselves together. But I happen to think that some of the individuals at the FinCom would also be of value in this process. They understand the finances, and I think we ought to value their thoughts in the process. We still have a responsibility and an obligation as elected officials. I'm not suggesting that we relinquish any of that responsibility. But I also think we have an obligation to listen and try to work with the ideas that are promulgated from some of these other groups and individuals.
Well, I agree that trying to be as inclusive as you can be, but staying focused is probably the best way to go, because that way you're gonna spot where there's disagreement as well as where there's agreement. And if you're trying to pursue a particular model because you think there's value in it, you can identify incremental steps. And it's like I said earlier, I'm trying to build on what I consider to be the success of the finance consolidation to go to the next step, which might be harder to do, nevertheless important. I feel as though the tri-board, and as I said earlier, I've communicated with the chair of both school committee and FinCom. They're willing to meet again, discuss. Before I went back to them and suggested an agenda, I have books falling from my shelves here because of the earthquake in North Carolina. The aftershock finally made it here. I talked with the other members of the board just to feel you out as to what your willingness is. Sounds like it's an interest in trying to not only resume conversation but maybe expand some of the scope of the conversation. So I'd like to do that. I believe at this stage of the game, relatively soon, the tri-board concept should be formalized, either through a bylaw or a written agreement from 3 committees or something, because at this point in time it's the goodwill of everyone that is doing it, and it's worked pretty well. But I think once you find that it is institutionally helpful, it's a good idea to actually document the fact that it exists, it has a role, it has a place, the timing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little bit of a detail, but I think that's something that we can also bring up to the group if we get the chance to reconvene the team and talk a little bit about how it would operate going forward. In terms of sort of taking us, if these are the things that we think are important, and we had a lot of conversation in the last board, and we spent a lot of time going back and forth about what we could actually put as a goal. It seemed to me that the first step is, from a strategic point of view, these are the things we need to be worrying about. Now, not all of them can be done in the current year, but I don't want to suggest there aren't other things, because there could well be. We haven't talked much about economic development, not because it's not important, but when I was trying to formulate this, it's not the job is done, but the effort is underway. It already has an investment from a budget point of view by identifying an individual who spends half his time doing it. It has a committee that helps to guide it, as well as the select board. So I don't want to say that economic development is off the table, because it isn't. It's just that I don't want to declare victory either. I guess I'm throwing that out for folks is to say, okay, if it's not articulated as one of the strategic objectives, have we lost something? Because I think many of our fellow taxpayers are looking for opportunities, for us to find opportunities to reduce the tax burden by, having development in town, whether it's residential or commercial or whatever. So anyway, I leave that for, further conversation. What I'd like to do, as we talk about this, is to say, okay, are these categories reasonable categories? Are there others? I don't want to, flesh them out too much, but I think that they, from my point of view, give us some focus. It gives us the opportunity to talk about to the citizens of the town sort of a broad array of things we want to address, and then we need to translate them into steps we're going to take. And by that I mean, if we are looking to find ways to develop, I'll call it, it's not really shared service, consolidated service delivery. And let's use IT as the example. Maybe a bad example because it's so hard. The goal is not to necessarily achieve it by November. The goal is to really explore it, really determine what the value is, and, perhaps by May, put a proposal forward that says, all right, we think we can do this in the following way, and in order to do it, we really make alterations in our budgetary recommendation to stand behind the model. Does that make sense, or is that too much in the weeds?
I think it makes sense. I mean, just the discussion we had on one item, like you said, these are very large, involved items. Like, we might be able to tick off a list here, but it's certainly not that simple. And I think additionally, with being in the middle of a pandemic, that also poses barriers to some of these things and, how far we can go with them. But, we should certainly start trucking in a direction.
Yeah.
If I can comment, I think I agree. They're broad categories, but they represent the categories that at the moment perhaps deserve the most emphasis, as opposed to, yes, there are many other categories or other things that could be added. We know that. We're just trying to get an emphasis, is the way I look at it, in certain areas. And from that perspective, there's no one perfect way of looking at it. And I have no problem with the way we've outlined it, or if you will, how you outlined it, Mr. Chairman, and proceeding down this path with the understanding that these things are not fixed in concrete. They get us going, they provide us a focus, and they allow us to begin to address the issues in a fairly cogent manner, but we can't put blinders on either. There are lots of other things going on at the same time. We're juggling many balls. These just happen to be the primary ones that we decided we at least might get our hands around right now. So I have no problem in that regard. I think there's a lot of fleshing out to be done. And quite honestly, it's going to take years. None of these are necessarily going to be resolved quickly. Some may be great, but on the whole, we're talking long-term for many of them, and participation from the community and departments throughout the town. So that's the way I do it.
Okay. Well, maybe what we could do is, before I leave it, I would like to just ask the town administrator to sort of comment to the extent he feels comfortable, including, what are you guys thinking? I've only got two hands, wait a minute. But not only from the point of view of reacting to what we've been talking about, but any, from your perspective, what might we be missing here? What is it that, where you sit, is an issue that we ought to be, surfacing at this point in time?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the board has done a great job in encapsulating the larger picture when it comes to the major issues confronting the town. Some of these, again, I think are attainable in the short term. Some of these are longer term. Some of these are also very contingent upon available funds. I'll use the road example. I think there's a lot of good intentions here to improve the roads, but that is one of the items that really needs additional funding in order to address in large part. But I think tonight you've done a great job on outlining the broader issues, and really now at this point it's a matter of kind of parceling out what attainable goals or processes can be moved forward over the next year, next 2 years. But it has painted I think a pretty clear picture of generally what the priorities of the board are, and then it's really a matter of getting into the details of direction to go and how to move this forward. Is that vague enough?
Well, okay, I mean, this is, what I can do then is get this sort of circulated for further discussion. We have some indication that we're heading in the same direction, and this can be tweaked and whatnot. It is, in my view, a picture which is followed by some goals which we agree upon, and then hold each other accountable for delivering those goals, which is the point. And then having them cascade down to the team to make sure that we have them, all rowing in the same direction, so to speak. I do think that some of the thoughts here are hard to do and necessary to try and find a way to do, which is some of this combination of services and whatnot, and then really thinking through service model for seniors and the like. This is not intended to ignore other constituencies or other issues because, as a board and as a town government, we're committed to public safety, we're committed to ambulance service, we're committed to robust recreation programs for cross-generational, if you will, the library, as well as the schools, but it's just intended to give us some direction on how we can move the ball forward beyond, just delivering on the services. So I want to thank the members for spending the time thinking about it, talking about it. I will get these things executed in a document form that we can circulate and have a conversation about, and then, move toward some specifics as to what we're going to address and how we're going to prioritize the activity. Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit at this point about hopefully a relatively short-term issue, which is, a more time-sensitive monitoring of the financial condition, particularly with respect to things like revenues and how are they stacking up against expectation and where are we over, where are we under, because if we need to make an adjustment, up or down for that matter, in November, we better get our arms around that sooner rather than later. And I know there's still a lot of uncertainty, but the item that comes from the Commonwealth in terms of their statement on local aid is one of the items that we were worried about, not the only one. So, and of course, as we all know, the state aid number is a relatively small percentage of the total. So I guess I was trying to think through, for discussion tonight, what kinds of metrics we think we need to be seeing as a board on a regular basis. I suspect that the finance department and the finance director are already doing it, but what do we think we need to be looking at? I am particularly concerned about tax collection and the rate of collection and how that compares with prior years, because it's a good indicator of not only the economic condition of our citizens. If they're finding it increasingly difficult to pay real estate taxes or water bills or whatever, we better get on top of that sooner rather than later, so we understand that perhaps further belt tightening needs to occur. To me, it's like, what is the revenue? What's the cash position? Do we still have a strong cash position so we can meet our short-term needs? Is there anything happening in the debt side that indicates that we've got some negative issues there, either bonds rolling over or what have you? May not be an issue because the interest rates are so low, but we need to sort of make sure we understand that. Anything happening that we need to know on our benefits costs. Then, of course, there's the whole issue of personnel. At some point, do we need to worry about the personnel model that we have? So this, to me, is a more dynamic. It's almost like creating a snapshot dashboard or something for the management, senior leaders of the town to be able to monitor, because we better know sooner rather than later if things are starting to lag. And the one we knew about, what we thought we knew about, which was state aid, was easier in a way to get your arms around, because it's going to be one number from one source. It's not going to change. But, you know, the tax levy, where does it stand? I have been asking that question to the treasurer, and at least through the, the June payments, it seemed to be holding up pretty well. But now we're into August, which is further into the economic struggle. Where do people stand? So that's kind of my thought as to what we might want to see on a more regular basis. Not a mountain of new information, but to take the data and the trends that we see and create some measurements so that we can understand better where we stand versus prior year and versus expectation.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Pete.
I'd like to follow up on that and suggest the following, because you've brought it up in different ways a couple of times now. Perhaps we ought to be looking at getting an executive summary on finances for the town, personnel situation, projects at the beginning of every meeting, every month, I'm sorry. We need to know what our status is, what the trends are, and so on. Let me see if I can clarify that. Our finance director, Carol Johnston, has been superb at getting a lot of the detail. When we ask her questions, she can get us that. So I feel very comfortable in that area. But your point is we need to understand trends. We need to understand things that we may not know about that are happening within a month when we suddenly see a decline in revenues. And she would be aware of that through the treasurer and so on. And that would be very useful to come to us in a summary form where she presents for 5 minutes or so at the beginning of a meeting to say, let me give you a quick financial summary of what's going on in the town and what I see happening at this stage. Now, of course, one could argue that we could use the same technique when we get 200 pages of a plan from a builder. That you're right, I have a hard time wading through the first 10 pages, forget the 150th page. But a summary, an executive summary that says, here are the salient points that you ought to be aware of as a board. Because we're going to end up sending a lot of that off to legal for final verification anyway. But we need to understand what are the points that we should be considering. And that's the same whether it's for a department head coming in, getting an accounting from the town's finance director, which right now is of utmost importance to us. Obviously, if public safety has some issues as a whole, we ought to know about that, and perhaps the town administrator presents that or has one of those department heads come in and say, hey, for this meeting, you need to be aware of this, this, and this. But these are things that I think we would benefit from, to know that if something's happening, and a trend is occurring, or a critical situation is developing, probably on a monthly basis is adequate. Obviously, if there's a major issue, it's going to be brought to our attention. But we ought to be prepared on a monthly basis to understand, here are the trends, here's what's happening. And I think that can be done in an executive summary or a series of very pointed executive summaries.
I agree with that. I think that the data is there. The question is how you format it and place it in front of us so that we can monitor it and raise questions as we think are appropriate. I'm not trying to insert the board in the middle of the financial management, but I do think it's important at this stage of the game for us to understand where things stand. I don't know, is Carol, are you on, or did you?
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
I have
any reaction to this?
I think it would be great for you guys to have that information. I think it's more important to you to tell me what you're looking for so that I can fine-tune it to the way, speak to the audience. What is it that you're looking for? How are you going to what information do you need to make your decisions? So I know a big thing right now are the real estate taxes. For fiscal year 20, we collected 97.4% of the FY20 real estate taxes. As of today, we've collected 91.4% of the first quarter taxes that were due August 1st, or August 3rd, I should say.
Okay.
And the demands for unpaid FY20 real estate taxes were due today. So obviously I don't have that information for you. The other thing was state aid. Everybody's been made aware. Based on what we budgeted and what the DLS put out last week, we would see an increase to our budgeted numbers of $236,573. Now, we need to be sure that we don't know what our assessments are going to be. So our assessments for charges back to the state could be a lot higher than what we have now. So I think we just have to be cautious of knowing that we had a little good fortune in the local aid number.
Well, yeah, I think that's, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pete.
What I was going to make a quick comment is that's precisely the kind of information where Carol can give us a very brief overview, and then she can also point out to us, by the way, this is trending differently than what we thought, or we suddenly, this is a big dip or a big increase, but she can point those out to us so that we get an understanding up front of, okay, trending is different than we anticipated. Let's begin looking at what actions need to be taken now. But I didn't mean to put her on the spot right now to tell us what was going on. What I was saying is, I know she has that information and she's very good at getting it to us if we just tell her, here are the kinds of things we want.
Well, I think, it's being kind of discussed that maybe it's more than what I had originally thought of, which is just the revenue, monitoring revenues, because you're right. I mean, if there's unexpected costs that have an equally, negative impact on us, we should be aware of that as well. I was thinking in the context not only of where do we stand sort of year to date, it's where do we stand versus prior year, because that gives not the dollars but the percentages. That gives us a good handle on whether or not the economic condition is causing deterioration in payment, if it is or it isn't. Then there's also the what is it versus what we expected. Carol, I don't know, when you do the budgeting, do we do a month by month on this, or do we, in terms of the revenue income?
No, we don't do a month by month. It's just done on an annual basis. It would be hard to project on a month by month just because of real estate. We come in on a quarter, but that could trickle in over the rest of the quarter. So it would be a little bit difficult to project based on month to month. We could try quarter to quarter, but we have budgeted only on an annual basis.
Well, yeah, my
expenses as well.
Not to create new work. It's to take what we have and, as Pete said, create some kind of executive summary that shows us information versus either prior year, which might be helpful, or year to date versus total. To me, I'm looking in here again. We have the local receipts revenue summary, which totals, almost $2.5 million. We're expecting in FY21, $2.490 million in local receipts. That's the projection. The largest numbers there are motor vehicle excise and, frankly, building permits. They make up, more than half of the total. So if motor vehicle excises and building permits are running similar to prior year, I don't mean month to month, but just year to date in terms of actual collections, and then that tells me something about the conditions of the payer. And if it's getting way behind, then I know that I need to adjust my thinking, and frankly, I may need to make an adjustment in midstream in terms of my budget, because I get a better sense that the revenue is not going to hold up, and I'm going to be left with, obviously I can't be left with a deficit, but I mean I'm going to be left with zero free cash at the end of the day because I spent all my money.
Right.
Is it possible just to do a year over year, or is that not easily done?
No, we can do a year over year. That's not a problem at all, and a year-to-date budget.
I mean, to my colleagues, I mean, that gives us something in terms of the revenue beyond, there's what are the key items? Is it going to be these local receipts? It's going to be state aid, which we have a better sense of now, we hope, and the revenue generated by the tax levy. Those are big numbers, so that's going to tell us a lot about what's going on. Now, to your point, Carol, the good news is, they're holding up on their local aid. The other shoe has to drop, which is the assessments, right? So if they're going to go up, then it's going to neutralize some of this. Now, something like Tri-County is already established. No one can change that as far as I can tell. We charge that based upon an old enrollment number, and that's going to be the number for the year, no matter how enrollment is impacted by, COVID. And then the employee benefit number, it's interesting because the reality of employee benefits, particularly in health care right now, is that healthcare costs are way down. It's a little counterintuitive, but it's actually the case. Self-insured health plans are experiencing significant gains. Insurance companies are issuing refunds or rebates. And the reason for that, of course, is the deferral of elective procedures. No one wants to go to the doctor for a minor thing anymore because they don't want to get something worse. No, I don't see how we get any benefit out of that from the GIC, because I think we just pay whatever they charge us. It might be worth a call to them by somebody to say, hey, I understand Blue Cross is thinking of some rebates. What about you guys? You can make that call, Mike.
I'll need some luck on that one, dealing with the
Hey,
GIC.
your message.
Ouija board out.
But honestly, the fact that the Norfolk County retirement system had demanded that we make the payment on time at the beginning of the year, from my perspective, was unconscionable. In the face of all this, if the retirement board was nevertheless given the full authority to require you to pay in full without any recognition of where things might go, I think that was pretty bad. And Pete, that goes back to how do we just sit here and take this from these outsiders? And I'm not trying to point fingers at the Norfolk County Retirement Board, don't get me wrong. But that was really pretty tone deaf. Even if they could have allowed a payment schedule or something. Anyway, Carol, what I was hoping to do is give you some idea here of what might be helpful to us. And Pete's right. I mean, we need to tell you exactly what we want, and you tell us what we can't get because it's just too hard to get. But it's something to me that I think about, and every time I see the warrants come from Lisa with Munis, I go and look at the cash situation at the bottom, which seems to be holding up reasonably well. If that starts to deteriorate, that's a problem. But we don't have a problem right now in paying operational costs. Is that right?
That's correct.
If we get to that point, we better know well in advance, because that would be a bad thing. And I don't see it happening, but it could.
We would make you aware of anything that would happen that would be negatively affect the town. Immediately, as quickly as we find it.
Well, part of my goal in getting this information is not only for the board to see it, but to make it usable and available to, other groups and the citizens at large so they can see where we stand. That's no big surprise comes along that we should have been telling them about before it hits us. Well, I think that what I would like to see is some revenue projections, not revenue, year-to-date revenue. I'd like to see year-over-year comparison and then a year-to-date versus budget on the big items. It doesn't have to be, for example, we're supposed to get $102 on yard sale permits. I'm not that worried about that one.
I don't know. That might be tough.
It might be. But, and then to your point, what are the, unexpected costs, particularly with respect to external assessments? We should be made aware of those as well. Because if we're going to go into town meeting, particularly in November, with some change in our approach to the budget, either plus or minus, we better know about it sooner rather than later, and we better make sure that, Finance Committee is made aware of it as well. And I agree with Pete. What I would like to see is a monthly report of a couple of pages that says here's where it is. And if we have the opportunity for you to come to the board, just brief us quickly, that would be helpful as well, because that makes sure that the public understands where we stand.
Okay.
Then we'll do that on Fridays. Oh, wait a minute, you don't work on Fridays.
That's true.
That's true. We'll be talking to ourselves. I talked about this earlier, and this is for Mike and to some degree Karen, who's not here. So I'd like to come back to this. Identify the big chunky item that's going to come up in a board meeting, in a future board meeting, and with the appropriate description or caveats or whatever, get it out to all the board members, particularly electronically, so that they want to go through it and have questions that might be addressed before the meeting. For example, if they see something that comes from a developer, it might be a question that we can develop, that we can forward to Melissa in advance, so we can make sure she addresses it as she reviews the engineering or whatever. But this is something that I would like to see us try to work on to improve our decision-making process. And it jumped to the fore again because I did receive from Karen as a heads up to help with the budget, with the agenda planning, a stormwater and land disturbance permit request from a developer, which is, hundreds of pages on a property that on Orchard Street. So for the board to get that information, in our current methodology, which is to make sure it gets out to the board members, hopefully by Thursday, prior to a Monday meeting, is simply not enough for the board members to be able to get their arms around it, ask questions of the experts that they need clarification on prior to a meeting, if appropriate. Obviously not to be discussed among the board members, but for clarification, I just feel as though that could help us be more efficient and more focused in our questioning of either applicants or proponents of major contracts or any other item that is complex. I mean, an example is going to be we're going to be asked to set water and sewer rates. Is that going to be the 17th or the end of August, Mike? Yeah.
I believe that was the 17th, but I'll check on that again.
Yeah. Whatever information is going to be provided to the board to support that rehearing, we should all have by now. Now, we never asked you to get it to us by now.
Yep.
So I'm not trying to call you out on it, but again, for us, it's such an important item to get the data Friday afternoon. And this is not a criticism. This is just my view of what I look to be, where can can we improve the operations of the board and get, ourselves in a situation where we can be more focused on our questions, have already addressed, in the fact-finding phase, some of the nitty-gritty that perhaps can be clarified without being involved in a big meeting. I feel as though there's area for improvement here, and this is not new to me. I mean, other members of the board over the years have said the same thing. Actually, it was highlighted for me. The stormwater disturbance back and forth till the 11th hour with Emerson Place. I mean, that was just, should not have happened. And I don't know how the other board members feel about this or what they'd like to see. I don't want to create a lot of work information that turns out to be something no one's going to act on anyway. But, 200 or 300 pages of material as the prep for a board meeting, even 48 hours or 72 hours notice is just not enough to enable us to be thoughtful in our questioning. I don't know if the other members are still with me or...
I'm here. I would agree.
No, I am all you. It's very clear.
I mean, as much time as possible is great. I mean, that was a lot of reading, and to be quite honest, probably the first time I've laid eyes on plans like that. So it was a bit of a shock factor too. So just trying to decipher everything, understand everything, be prepared with my questions. Obviously I expect to do work prior to the board meeting to do that, but that was pretty intensive.
Well, a lot of information is not the same thing as helpful information.
Abbreviated information.
Yeah, well, I mean, abbreviation means somebody has to do it and it's work, and
I know.
time itself. And, I've looked at these things for a long time and they're still monumental. And it's difficult to read plans and it's hard to understand what the plans are telling you. And, the proponent is only trying to give you the information that the proponent thinks you will use to approve their, application. And I'm not trying to point fingers at them. I mean, but honestly, the 200-page stormwater analysis of every minute of every day is not helpful to decision-making at all, from my perspective. That's for the engineers. And maybe the process here is simply it comes together and, we do a two-stepper to say, look, before we're going to consider anything, we're going to have our engineer report back to us in the meeting. And the next meeting, we will take it up. I don't know. I'm struggling a little bit with trying to find a way to do this. But the ability of the town's engineer to work with the board members, to help the board members be comfortable that they understand what's happening here beyond what they're already doing with the developer, with the board, with the DPW director, with the town administrator. There needs to be, in my view, another step, and I'm trying to get a way to get at that in a way that is helpful to us. Getting into us earlier is, a double-edged sword. If it's impenetrable and it's a week early, it still isn't as helpful as something that's comprehensive but also addresses the major issues that the board members are going to be asking about. So, anyway, Pete, you have some thoughts on this?
Well, I do. I'm concerned that maybe we ought to be looking more to the town engineer to say, okay, here are the key points of what you're going to be addressing. You have the whole packet in front of you. You can look at these points within the packet. And if the town engineer hasn't had time to go through it and provide those salient points to us, then we are not going to be in a position to review it with the applicant. And until such time as the engineer gets that information to us, we're just going to have to defer it. Much as I hate to say it that way, the reality is we cannot be experts in everything. We have experts, supposedly, to help us in these areas. We have a lot of questions to ask. but let's get the initial analysis from an expert so that we have it succinctly outlined, preferably in a page, no more than 2, that we understand here are the issues that we're confronting. And here's where you can go if you want in the document to verify these things. And now we're in a position to say, fine, I can review that, I can check the document. There's a lot of other stuff there. I want to go through it. That's my prerogative. But at least I know where I'm starting from, what I'm looking for, and I can begin to formulate not just questions, but an overall understanding of what the whole project involves that we're supposed to be working with that evening.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, it would be helpful. Okay, maybe that's something that maybe with respect to a development project, big item, and which is a lot of information, and it's a long process for everybody. Maybe some of the answer is to ask the engineer, our engineer, to take another step, for which obviously they will be paid by the developer for the work that we need to do to make sure that we understand what we're doing. Because the way it's working right now is there's back and forth between developer and, developer has a proposal, engineer reviews it, has a bunch of comments, developer goes back to the engineer, the engineer says, okay, I reviewed your responses, 2 of them are still not answered, the rest of them are okay, then they go back again, and then we end up with a series of letters and whatnot which talk to us about what needs to go into our decision, which is not quite the same thing as the engineer helping us by saying that here's the process, here's the big issues that we've addressed. They're pretty well along on, let's say, the culvert effect on the neighbors. That you should be asking them about this, and that would be helpful to us. And the only way to do that is to do it in advance, not the night before. And that puts the burden on the developer to get the information to the engineer so that our engineer can be responsive to the needs of the board. So I think we're in agreement here is that maybe there's a step here that we could follow. I have to say, it's similar though. At some point we're going to get, big contract from the developer of the DPW building with a bunch of this and that, and we have to approve it. What should we be concerned about? What should we be asking? And that is really something where there's like a management summary component of some of this stuff that needs to be addressed. And I know it's extra work, and I'm not trying to make more work because, we don't have the resources and we've cut back the hours and everything else. But as a board, I think it helps us if we have a little bit more information up front. It's not just volume, it's the quality of the material. And we're going to be pushing back a little bit on proposers, whether it's department heads or developers, to help us with the decision making by giving us a little bit more guidance. All right, well, I'll work on that with Mike, because it's really a matter of procedure. It could certainly be something that we address in the board procedures and processes. This is what we expect, and this is what we're going to do with it. And I want to propose things that we can agree on that we can actually do, not something that is just a statement we make and then we run around not executing. Okay. The last item I had for us to talk about was these committees. We always get it at the end of the meeting when that's in. I've looked at them again. Certainly the ones that we pretty much agreed upon are we're not going to worry about anymore, like master plan committee and whatnot. I think our new colleague I think she's agreed to work with the economic development committee. Isn't that what I saw?
Yeah, I
Okay.
did.
Which is an important committee, and it's important to have somebody on there, so that would be good if you would do that. Have we heard back from the school folks yet?
Yes. I heard I heard back from the chair, and she said she had checked a subcommittee list, and they have a select board liaison listed, as well as one for FinCom, but was never formally utilized. So from the board school committee perspective, they have no issues with a member of the select board attending meetings, more than welcome to come to any open meeting, but official business would still need to be handled between chairs of the committees. I didn't hear anything in that response in terms of if any, like reciprocal, if anybody from the school committee wanted to sit in on select board meetings, but that's okay. I think one way at this point, I think would be fine. And on that note, I did listen to the last one. I know we're talking about, liaisons for committees. So if I don't have to talk about it now, but if you want to hear anything about their plans and how the last meeting went, I could fill you in on that as well.
Well, why don't we do that at the end of this meeting? Because I think certainly that would be valuable for us to know. I think that I would like to take a look at the Economic Development Committee Charter. I'm going to make some recommendations for some slight changes in it, which I will give to the board for the next meeting to determine whether or not we think it's the right way to go. For example, we say that it's an advisory committee of 5 to 7 members. Well, we got to come up with a number. And if it's going to be 7, then we should say 7. So that's just one example. So I will do that for the next meeting, and then we can discuss it. It's not a major surgery. It's just some, I think, tightening up the language. And then I did take a look at the sort of the committee assignments, if you will, for IS and communications and for website and communication. And there's certainly overlap there. I'm struggling conceptually as to, what is the task we're trying to get help on. And Pete, you've certainly been intimately involved with IS and communications. But is the website and communication a technology committee? Is it an advisory group on communication strategy? What we say is it's leading the effort to replace the legacy town website. If all they're doing is working on the website, then, what does that mean? Does it mean the technology or the platform or the messaging or the infrastructure to make sure it's done effectively? I know the IS and Communications Committee has done an awful lot of work, hands-on, on the technology platforms and whatnot. And is that more focused on utilizing technology as a communications device, externally and internally? I don't know. I'm asking the question really because I have to say I'm struggling a little bit with what I would like to see come out of this. And maybe they remain as 2 different groups. I don't know. Pete, do you have any thoughts on this? Or yeah. I'm sure you do because you've been in the middle of it.
The web committee, quite honestly, website is to me more of the media communications committee, if you will. It includes the website, whether it's Facebook or anything else. The object of it is to communicate with the community at large and to give them an opportunity to see what's going on in almost real time if something happens, so we can communicate very rapidly. The reason it got wrapped in sort of with IT initially had to do with what was the platform that we were going to use. Forget about the cell phones for the moment, but what platform, in what way were we going to implement it, the kinds of languages, because there are some issues there, maintenance issues. There were a variety of things. In truth, it's an information systems technology issue, but it could be separate from the overall IS infrastructure of the town. In how we approach it, and I have no problem that way. My concern is to make sure they understand that there is guidance available, that I believe our committee has a responsibility and an obligation to be involved with understanding where they're headed and to give them a platform to communicate to us needs and concerns, because we're the ones who are ultimately responsible for setting the policy. So how we set it up in terms of our interface, in terms of whether it's a separate committee or not, doesn't trouble me so much as making sure that they have the support necessary for their purposes, and that we are properly communicated with and available to support them when and if they need it. I personally don't need to be involved, if you will. And certainly it could be handled by either one of the two of you in terms of both the infrequency of our participation and the high level at which it normally gets any specific issue having to be resolved. We aren't going to have to get to that level. And if we do, they can always call upon, whether it's me or someone in IS or IT within the town, to assist them. But on the whole, I don't see it evolving that way. I think it's important that we set it as a committee as rapidly as possible, tonight if possible, and say, fine, it's a committee, here are the members, and one of us will interface to it and provide them the support from the board. But that's my view.
Yeah, I'd like to get it resolved, but first of all, I like the concept of media communication committee as opposed to a website, because it's too narrow if it's just a website. And the way it's written right now, it's all about the website. But before we appoint a committee, I'd like to have this is what we're asking you to do. And it's an advisory committee helping us to implement communication strategy through the available media or something to that effect. This group is not going to be the one that actually gets on the machine and fixes the website. I mean, maybe they are, I don't know, but I don't think so.
That's your job at that point as chair.
Yeah. And it's certainly no secret that I've been pretty skeptical of this. Not because it's not a good idea, it's just that I want to have an enterprise that can actually execute. And the new website is great. It looks a lot better. I give them a lot of credit. And if you go through it, there's still a lot of legacy information that is out of date and, incorrect. That's just because the volume of this is such that we don't have the resources to keep it up. And I don't want to create an expectation in the eyes of the public that this is something that it can't be. So
If I may, but if there's an advisory committee for media communications, I mean, that correlates closely with one of the goals that we just discussed too. So if this group of people are able to flesh out ideas on more effective, efficient, widespread communication on our part to the public, then that sounds like a fantastic committee idea to me.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, that this is these are folks that really understand how these things work, how they help people make decisions or how they engage people.
Mm-hmm.
They can make recommendations as to, look and feel, but they can't do it. No, they can. But this is not intended to be a group that operates the website. Now, maybe it should be. I don't think it should be, but maybe it should be. I don't know. This gets back to, and I'd like to have them, a group talk to us about operational, issues. How do you make sure it stays up to date? How much time does it take? What kind of resources do you need? Which is, as Pete well knows, is the refrain that I've been singing for many, many months. And I'm still struggling a little bit with the fact that we've adopted some of this stuff, and I still don't understand how we're organizing it and managing it. I would like to see if I can take a crack at reworking the words here on the Allied Media Communication Committee, consistent with what we talked about, for proposal to the board, the next meeting. If I hear you right, Pete, though, you believe that the IS and Communications Committee charter and task group is pretty much, it's still good and still valid, and we got to continue with that group the way it is?
Yeah, we need to add to it, but yes, we need that to continue to provide direction to the town over the long term. We've done a lot over the last few years.
Yeah.
There's more that will have to be done, whether you get into cybersecurity or a whole series of issues, consolidation. But long term, I think it will be very valuable to the town, and it becomes then a very valuable and integral part of the town in terms of the way committee operates.
And you're willing to continue to serve on that, I assume?
Oh, I wasn't sure about that.
You want it.
But I do want to see that we get some more people on that committee. I've been, as you know, incredibly impressed with Richard Harlow, and particularly the amount of time he put in to get us to where we are. We as a town ought to be singing his praises for what he has done for this town. It's superb. But we need to add at least a couple more members to that committee, because as a board member, I'm just there primarily as an observer. I certainly have no problem interjecting my views at this point, but it is their committee, and we need to get them, help them to get that established as a full, continually working committee. And we did wrap in the emergency planning and safety aspect to it, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, okay.
Can I just ask another question, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
So from this point, so we are finalizing who on the board is going to be a liaison to particular committees. So at this point, once in a way we have those assignments, do we reach out to committee chairs and ask to be included? Is there something more automatic that happens? Should I start searching for agendas and contact people?
I think that what we would do is, soon we finalize this, typically Karen would do the outreach and say, look, here's the interested in having, getting involved, give you the information on who the chair is, because technically speaking, if they're a new appointment, the committee has to meet to reorganize itself.
Okay.
So I think that's probably the way we would do it.
Okay.
But just so, in terms of the Economic Development Committee, let's take a vote on it, since you've been designated as the liaison. And then, Pete, I guess we would go ahead and designate you again as the select board representative on the IS and Communications Committee, and then we have those decisions made. And the only one left out hanging then is the media communication, newly minted media communication committee.
Will we have to vote on school committee as well?
Yeah, go ahead and do that, I think, since that's been final. Then I would make a motion that the board appoint Erin Underhill as the board's liaison with the school committee and the economic development committee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'll call the board. Mr. McCaffrey, yes. Mr. Germain?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Do I say yes or do I abstain?
You can vote.
I can. Okay, then yes.
If he voted no, and I would move that the board designate Mr. Jermaine to serve as the select board liaison for the IS and Communications Committee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Poll the board. Mr. McCaffrey, yes. Mr. Jermaine,
Yes.
Ms. Underhill,
Yes.
yes. Motion is carried. Okay, the last item then.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Last week, if I'm not mistaken, we also talked about the enterprise fund committees.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
And I think we ought to solidify that this week also. There are just the 3 enterprise funds, and I think we agreed that unless there was anything that came up, let's consolidate all 3 under one committee.
Yes, I think that's exactly what we should do. I think we should vote to do it. We should have perhaps you and the town administrator get together with just come up with a little charter to confirm at the next meeting. Then we will have to populate the committee. That would be, again, I hate to go out to ask people to serve on a committee and not be able to tell them exactly what it is. So I think we need to have something written down to present, but I think we could do that pretty quickly. Do you feel comfortable with sort of putting that together over the next week so that we could actually adopt it, or?
I'll put something together and I'll pass it. I'll work with Mr. Kaczynski on that if he's willing.
Absolutely.
He's willing. So I would make a motion that the board that the board appoint a enterprise fund committee to oversee activities of the water enterprise, the sewer enterprise, and the stormwater enterprise, and also then therefore to disband the drinking water committee and the sewer study committee.
I'll second that.
So it's been moved and seconded. Discussion. I'll poll the board. Mr. McCaffrey, yes. Mr. Jermaine,
Yes.
Ms. Underhill,
Yes.
motion is carried. Okay, I will ask Karen then when she gets back to give us the sort of the final list of the committees, because we've changed a number of things here, and I think we would find that there are probably, particularly with respect to the enterprise, there are a couple of folks, maybe more than a couple, on those 2 committees that'd be willing to serve on a consolidated committee as well. So there are some folks there who might be able to help out. Okay, the last item which was brought up was asking Aaron to just brief us a little bit on the school committee conversation, because I'm sure this is pretty important. Not they all are important, but this it certainly is.
So the meeting in its entirety was nearly 5 hours.
I feel like Sarah Piker that we're not able. Another challenge is upon us.
Yes. So the initial proposal was more to bring kids back in a hybrid sense, where kids would come in and go to school 2 days a week and remote learn for 3 days a week. So one group would come in Monday and Tuesday. Most of the building would be empty Wednesday, and then the other half of the kids would come in Thursday and Friday. A lot was discussed. Some of the, obviously it was all the schools, so some of the discussions that came up had to do with air quality, and it actually, don't quote me, but it actually sounded like there were even concerns about the new Clyde Brown in terms of the air, I wish I could remember what they called it, the air needs. There's a number component. I think they said Clyde Brown was at 10 and it should be a 13, or something to that effect. So there was a lot of information that was discussed. They also talked about, obviously, safety, where kids would be 6 feet apart. Everybody would be masked, even down to, I believe they said down to kindergarten, they'd work on the masks. There would also be the potential for a full remote option, but there weren't really a lot of details for that at the time. The school union, the Millis Teachers Union, said that they were willing to bargain at the local level in terms of how they moved forward. In the end, the school board voted to return to school fully remote through Columbus Day-ish in October, where they'll reassess and see if they change any of those plans. They did talk about a special population of students, not necessarily just a special education situation, but other students that had situations that physically going to the school would be helpful or necessary. That population may still go in on Wednesdays. They mentioned a need for a van, but it sounded like they might have had a grant opportunity for that. They mentioned having to repair a bus. And that was pretty much the gist of it. I have spoken to a few people since the meeting, and I did get the feeling that the teachers felt that they were heard and supported by the school committee, and it was a super difficult decision for them to make, and you could just tell watching and listening to it. But it's what everyone felt was the safest way to proceed at the moment. And it was, when I had mentioned that there weren't a lot of details on some of this, it wasn't for lack of effort or anybody dropping the ball. It was that this is a moving target. Things keep changing. And it's not an easy task for anybody for what they're trying to do. So bottom line, kids are going to go back fully remote throughout all the schools. Some special populations may go in on Wednesdays, and they'll reevaluate in October.
Well, okay. Well, thank you for that. I guess that this just shows the value of the liaison role and just being able to bring us up to date. I'd like to suggest that maybe we can have the chair, the select board do this, just send a note to the school chair and the school committee saying we understand that the difficult times, whatever we can do to support your activity, we're ready, willing, and able to help. Just to let us know and good luck or something. I mean, we ought to do some outreach because this is a really hard decision. I know it is.
Yeah.
I'll know it.
To
So,
that end, Mr. Chair,
yes.
can I ask, do they have any needs for computers or anything for the kids operating remotely that they need funding for?
They didn't talk about any of those details.
Okay.
So I don't know, but I definitely agree. A proactive outreach for this topic would be really nice. So is that something you wanted to do?
Well, I would like the board to do it. I mean, I'm happy to do it on behalf of the board. I don't want to, I do it on my own too, but we're here, we've got this meeting. It sounds to me as though we extend a hand, at least it shows that we're concerned as they are. Mm-hmm. And I'm concerned. I mean, it's not like it's unique, but this is such a unique situation. I think it would be beneficial to everybody if we just did an outreach and let them know that we're here to help if we can.
Okay.
I would propose that since Erin is our liaison to the schools, perhaps this is something she should write to them and we endorse as the board. Excuse me.
Well, that's fine. I mean, any way you want to do it. I think, honestly, chair to chair is probably more appropriate at this point, because I want to send a note to the chair of the school committee. But I would rather do it that way.
Okay.
That's fine.
Do we need to make a motion on that?
Well, yeah, I think it would
Okay.
be helpful as an official vote of the board.
Okay. I move that Chairman McCaffrey reach out to the chair of the school committee, Kerry Roach, to voice the board's support to the school committee during this pandemic.
I'd second that to say that, and to offer any help that we can within reason and that we are very supportive of what they are doing this time.
So it's been moved and seconded as amended. I'll poll the board. Mr. McCaffrey, yes. Mr. Jermaine?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Motion is carried unanimously. Okay, so that kind of covers the list on the agenda. I don't think that anything else to be covered tonight. I want to thank you all for the participation. Personally, I think this was a good exercise for us to start talking about these serious issues in a manner which allows us to, express some views, to have a little debate and discussion. We don't have the next item waiting for us in the agenda that we have to make a decision on, common vicular license. Thank you for your indulgence, and I appreciate the input from everybody, and it's been very helpful for me to get the input from my colleagues. So I would take a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
The moved and seconded that we adjourn, and we will reassemble next Monday night at 6:30. All those in favor of the the motion to adjourn, I'll poll the board. Mr. McCaffrey, yes. Mr. Jermaine?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
All right, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you all, and thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Very
Good night, guys.